Hello friends, welcome back to 1D10T Does Stuff, and I'm the 1D10T in charge, Trevor Stewart 1308. And today we will be reading from Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia by Sabrina Strings, and we will be discussing that, but first, today's ad read, today's pre-roll is brought to you by The Hidden Leaf, downtown Charlottesville, Virginia, 105 West Main Street, on the downtown mall, above the bricks, Suite 200. A great place to go with some great buds. To get some great buds, a bud, and the only thing better than their bud is their customer service. Also, they have the lowest prices in town, according to my own personally highly biased research, by which I mean I was incredibly high when I did my personally biased research. Now, also, they are findable on Instagram at The Hidden Leaf. Also, we are brought to you by the Kush Gang Snacks, purveyors of fine edibles and drinkables, also findable on Instagram at KGSnacks434. And our third and final sponsor is Firehouse, that's spelled with a Z. Where there's smoke, there's Firehouse. Also findable on Instagram at Firehouse, spelled with a Z. I suppose I should have their logo up just so that it's, seeable. Well, friends, before we get into talking about reading from Fearing the Black Body, I want to talk briefly about something that I'm hoping to discuss more in depth at a later time on a later show. And that would be the artist formerly known as Kanye West, now known as Ye, issued an apology recently for his abhorrent behavior and stuff. And I would like to look at it and discuss it. Not because it matters to me. I mean, it does matter to me about Ye's apology, but also, there's a conversation to be had around mental and behavioral health there, and especially mental health in the Black community. And I think that's what I'd like to talk about there. But I'm not prepared to, I haven't done the preparation to have that conversation quite yet. And I think I'm gonna see if I can try to get a special guest in to talk about it at some point. But that's not a today project. Although soon, I'd like to do that soon. But today we are going to continue with Fearing the Black Body. The reason although let me step back a second and say the reason why I'd like to talk about Ye's apology and is because it opens the door to the conversation about mental health in the black community. And a lot of what I'm trying to do with these Tuesday streams, trying to talk about here, is the, Tuesday streams are, and these videos are about, how the healthcare industry and infrastructures in the United States are indifferent at best, antagonistic at worst to marginalized people. Specifically, I'm talking about how the behavioral health and mental health infrastructures and systems in the U.S. Are dangerous to black women. And I feel like talking about the Ye apology is opening the door to talking about mental health in the black community. So that's why I would like to cover that. I think we're all going to have our own opinions about Ye's apology, about if it's good enough, if it goes far enough, if he went too far to be able to apologize, things like that. I'm not really interested in having that conversation. That's a debate. That's going to become a debate. That's going to become a thing where it's going to be partisan, divisive. You know, that part of that conversation is just not going to be helpful. However, using this as a way to open the door to having a larger conversation, I think, is useful. Yeah, I think it's useful. I ain't a pro. I'm just an idiot, so I'm making guesses here. So yeah, that is a future thing. Now, with fearing the black body, okay, see, I'm trying to pull a little trick here where we get far enough into the video so that the auto-generated thumbnail grab on YouTube will grab specifically a picture of me and a picture of the book. And what it's probably going to grab is when I just put my hand in front of the camera right there. However, yeah. I also want to briefly, before we go on too much further, talk about what I feel like is the sort of insipid at best, insipid and tepid at best, or spineless, I think would be a better way to put it, response that the leadership is having towards the things that have gone on in Minneapolis. I feel like, you know, Trump muttered, "Oh, this isn't good," and then everybody just backed off. This is not... I don't feel like we're, you know... I don't feel like the leadership is taking this as seriously as they should. I do feel like the constituencies are, the people still on the ground are. You know, it's, but I don't feel like I don't feel like the Democratic leadership. I hate that we only have Democratic leadership. That we don't have someone to force the Democrats to be more responsible. But the Democratic leadership, I feel like, is just not doing it, not standing up for it, not doing it, just not. So this is where we're at. That's my opinion at the moment on that situation. I wanted to talk about this because of last week's episode and talking about the resistance of resistance, and I think we need to still continue to resist in every way possible. And if that means continuing to make art and continuing to talk about difficult things, and, you know, we need to push the leadership to address the problems fully. I think that's the addendum to last week's show that I would like to add there. So yeah, there we are. I guess we're ready to get into it. Let me grab my highlighters. Have a sip of coffee. So as we get into this, friends, go ahead and grab yourself something to smoke, something to drink, something comfy, and let's settle on in. And there we are. There we are. You know, one of these days I'm just gonna have to come up with a whole better setup for this whole thing. Alright, let's find where we are in the book. Looks like we're about here. Yep. We are on The Rise of the Big Black Woman. And yeah, we read some already, but we're just gonna go back to the start of the chapter and read from there. Yeah. Chapter 3, The Rise of the Big Black Woman. Francois Beignet was the salt of the earth. His parents were tillers of the soil in a small farming town in northwestern France. From these humble origins, he would go on to make a significant contribution to Western intellectual history. He would be the first person in the world to create a system of human classification based on race. The field of what today is known as race science took off during the long 18th century, a period that encompasses the High Enlightenment and the peak of the transatlantic slave trade. France and England were cultural and colonial powerhouses during the era. Learned men from these two nations generated a significant portion of the racial scientific theories. Of course they did. Though Beignet was first to market, scholars have typically overlooked or diminished the significance of his racial theories. But Beignet's intervention in the field of race science was consequential. His work reveals the centrality of concerns about the feminine aesthetics to race-making projects since their inception. I think I do want to highlight that sentence, because that is... integral to Beignet's and many subsequent racial classification systems was the attempt to pin down fundamental physical differences between Europeans and non-Europeans, with an intense focus on the women in various categories. These differences were to serve as proof of European superiority. In this way, whereas women's physicality had been largely outside the social distinctions that were made between Europeans and Africans in the Renaissance, by the 18th century it was treated as foundational to them. The racialized female body became a legible, a form of text from which racial superiority and inferiority were read. Beignet was born in 1625 in a small town in Anjou, France. Upon the death of his parents, he came under guardianship of his uncle, a priest. At the age of 15, he moved to Paris to attend the Collège de Clermont. And it was there that this son of a farmer encountered the high class of the French elite, inhabiting the same adolescent social world as the celebrated French playwright Molière. At college, Beignet became most clearly acquainted with the notorious opponent of Descartes, the priest-philosopher Pierre Gassendi. In the throbbing Parisian metropolis, Beignet trained under Gassendi in philosophy and physiology. I read philosophy and philosophy. Today, the two traveled to the south together. Read the words that are there, Trev. Together, the two traveled to the south of France, where Beignet earned a medical degree from the University of Montpellier in just 3 months. Montpellier. Sorry, that's in France. Montpellier is here in Virginia. The degree, however, carried the somewhat suspect stipulation that his fast-tracked medical knowledge was not to be exercised in the French Commonwealth. Dang, dude. It's like getting a doctorate from a community college. I know that this exposition about Beignet's life is integral to the book and actually kind of important to setting everything up so that we understand the geography as well as the social impacts that that led him to where he was. But also, it feels like a lot of extra stuff. So. But we'll continue to read it. Beignet then set out for different pastures in late 1658. By then, in his early 30s, he landed in India, where he would remain for the next 12 years, serving as the private physician for the Prince of Dara Shikoh, and then for Dara's brother and rival for the throne, Aurangzeb. The intimate details of these events and his role as a foreign witness are described in Beignet's book, Travels in the Mughal Empire. His travelogue mirrors the narratives written by earlier Europeans on their treks beyond the continent. What distinguished Beignet's account, however, was that he chose not just to describe men and women from various locales in India, but to sort them based on their skin color. According to Beignet, for example, to be a Mughal, it is enough that a foreigner have a white face and profess Mahometanism. This group was compared to the Frangois, or white Christians from Europe, and to the Indus, whose complexion is brown. Hello, baby. Hello. Someone has wet paws. Beignet did not see himself as having invented these distinctions. In fact, he imagines himself as an astute interpreter of existing social categories in India, in which he sees skin color as integral. In a letter to Jean-Baptiste Colbert, Louis XIV's finance minister, he marveled at the supposed Indian and Mughal fixation on biological purity and color, using the term race to mark the distinction between various groups. Beignet had not invented the term race, which had been in use since the Middle Ages, but was using it in a decidedly different fashion from those who came before. Beignet used the word to designate the clusters of people he encountered who varied by religion, region, and especially hue. The centrality of skin color in his early conception of race signaled a divergence from the ideas of theorists who preceded him. still in terms of Benier's racial theorizing, this was only the beginning. So I find this interesting that, interesting. There's a connection here to the color-based racism of the transatlantic slave trade. And again, I feel like all of this is going on to justify the slave trade. To justify the racism, the racism exists to justify the slave trade, and all of this race science is developed to then prop up the racism. And it's a non-scientific method. It's a backwards way of thinking. It's starting with a goal idea and then working to prove it. Much like I'm doing with this Tuesday streams / videos, where I'm starting with this base idea and working hard to prove it. However, what I think the difference is, A, I know I'm looking at a soft science. B, there's room for me to be doing this wrong, and my points to still be right. I think that this, we're looking at something sociological here. And I think that in and of itself makes this a different sort of investigation. Not a scientific investigation. So I feel like, yeah, I'm starting with a hypothesis. Yeah, I'm looking for evidence to back that up. But my hypothesis, other people have already done the research to prove my hypothesis correct. So I'm not starting from, I'm not starting from ground zero going with a sociological idea and then trying to say I'm finding scientific proof to back it up. I am admitting that I'm starting from a position of opinion, that I'm looking for proof to strengthen my opinion, and strengthen the position of my opinion, and I am attempting to convince others to see the world from my position. So this can't be mistaken, shouldn't be mistaken as some sort of journalistic investigation, or even an investigation in general. This is my attempt to convince other people who look like me that that there is an inherent problem with the medical infrastructures in the United States where marginalized people are concerned. So, yes and no. Yes, it is similar. No, it is not the same. I feel like a lot of the arguments being used in conservative circles, a lot of the arguments being used to maintain white supremacy are very much, if not directly growing out of the pseudoscience of race science, in the same vein of, in that you're starting with baked-in assumptions about these groups of people and then doing everything you can to confirm that. And right now we're seeing it play out with immigrants in the United States, but immigrants are just the most recent example. So, but I do think that the racism that we're looking at in the United States today, I know that the racism we're looking at in the United States today and the anti-immigrant sentiments and all of these, you know, there's a pretty direct line back to this right here. This guy, this stuff. In the 1670s, Beignet left India and returned to Paris, finding himself in a city embroiled in debates and demonstrations about one of the most pressing issues of his day, slavery. France had entered the transatlantic slave trade nearly a century after England, due, in large part, to religious infighting between the Catholic establishment and the Protestant Huguenots. The French slave trade was formally authorized by the monarchy in 1648. In 1664, Louis XIV granted Jean-Baptiste Colbert, along with his French West India Company, the sole rights to the transport of slaves from Africa to the French colonies in the Americas. The French slave trade was only a few years old by the time Beignet returned to his homeland, and it was experiencing considerable growing pains. Since 1315, the country had maintained what was known as the Freedom Principle, which stipulated that no person could be held as a forced laborer on French soil. This decree, however, said nothing about the practice of slavery in French colonies, which the monarchy willingly allowed. The king thus found himself in the dubious position of denouncing slavery in the kingdom, while issuing royal decrees sanctioning its practice in the colonies. The Janus-faced nature of these policies proved untenable. By the late 17th century, a smattering of African slaves were already making their way to French shores, sometimes as servants to colonial administrators, other times as stowaways. Many petitioned for their freedom the instant they set foot in the country. The king's position was to set free the slaves seeking freedom within the country throughout the 17th century. This practice collided with the 1685 royal decree known as the Code Noir, the Black Code, a law that regulated slavery in the colonies and served as a resounding renewal of colonial policies that condemned Africans to a lifetime of servitude. This inevitably led to ever more Africans seeking a taste of the vaunted but elusive French freedom that was being denied them in the overseas territories. Interesting. Beignet was well aware of the tenuous political situation that slavery Beignet was... We'll try that again. Beignet was well aware of the tenuous political situation that slavery posed. He had a personal relationship with Colbert. Moreover, since his return to Paris, Beignet had become a member of Madame de Selbier's salon, which was peopled with Louis XIV's courtiers and other nobles. One of the topics commonly up for debate was whether some groups of mankind were a different species than Europeans, and thus natural slaves. Hold on a second. I do want to highlight that little bit there. I shouldn't have to say it, but at this point I'm going to say we scientifically now know that any differences are essentially skin deep. That there really aren't differences between the different humans. You know? Just not that different. Shouldn't have to say that, but I'm gonna say it anyway, just in case anybody's missed it. This was not the first time Beignet would have encountered the question of whether natural slaves existed. These claims can be traced to the origin story crafted by Isaac Lapierre, who in 1650s conjectured that Gentiles were pre-Adamites, born before somehow and superior to the Jews who descended from the biblical Adam. Pierre's theory was deemed heretical by many in the 1650s, but in the context of rising slave trade and the profits it generated, many Frenchmen were to soften on this position. Scholars disagree as to whether Beignet himself was a polygenist, a believer that the human races are of different origins. But what is evident that his travels made him appear to others on the intellectual circuit as an expert on the topic of alien peoples. These attitudes, along with Beignet's studies in physiology, ignited an idea. He resolved to develop his own theory of humanity, one that could encompass and explain the tremendous biodiversity he had encountered on his travels. And in line with his medical training, his theory would be the first to achieve this goal by identifying fundamental physiological differences among swatches of humankind. In 1684, Beignet sketched out his theory in a letter to Madame de la Sablière that bore the rather grand title, A New Division of the Earth. In this 3-page manifesto, he explained his rationale for developing this new model of humankind. Hitherto, geographers have divided this new Hitherto, geographers have divided the earth only into different countries or regions therein. But my own observations have given me the idea of dividing it another way. The problem with the traditional geographic dissection of the globe, he concluded, was that it failed to acknowledge the tremendous physical distinctions found between peoples living in diverse parts of the world. In Beignet's estimation, men are almost all distinct from one another as far as the external form of their bodies is concerned, especially their faces, according to the different areas of the world they live in. And while globe-trotting men such as himself could often distinguish unerringly one nation from another, he nevertheless found that common unities of physical form across national boundaries warranted a new system for classifying mankind, a system he called types of race. Picanita's over there talking to Deadpan Dog. As noted, Beignet had not coined the term race, but with his new divisions of the earth, he had fundamentally changed what it meant. In his reimagination of the term, race did not apply only to the lowly Jewish or Moorish subjects of the crown, or to the highborns within the kingdom. Rather, all the world's peoples had a race, one that could be identified both by where they lived and their external physical features. I do think it's important that we're looking at what the ideas were before this reimagination, understanding what the thought process was prior to that. I'll check something real quick. All right. Curiously, despite Benier's certainty that everyone had a physically identifiable race, he nonetheless wavered on how many races there were in all, stating that there were 4 or 5. The first race included people from 3 different continents, comprising the whole of Europe in general, except for part of Muscovy, Africa, namely that between the... Hold on, I forgot to do the voice. The first race included people from 3 different countries, comprising the whole of Europe in general, except for part of Muscovy, Africa, namely that between the kingdoms of Fez and Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, and likewise a large part of Asia. Into the second race, he placed nearly the entire continent of Africa, excluding the northern coastal areas already ascribed to the first race. The third race, covering the nations of China, Japan, and much of East Asia, also included Uzbekistan, a small part of Muscovy, the Little Tatars, and the Turkomans. In the fourth race, standing conspicuously alone, were the Lapps, or the indigenous people of Scandinavia. The almost fifth race would have been reserved for the indigenous people of the Americas, but upon further consideration he placed them too into the first type. Skin color was the major consideration used to sort people into racial groups. I'm gonna guess that there are a couple of reasons for that. One, they're trying to prop up the ideas behind the transatlantic slave trade. Now, whether this is a conscious thing or subconscious on their part, that's what's going on. But two, it's obvious physical differences. If one's thinking were limited, if one were short-sighted, it might make sense. However, we also know that that's not a thing. It pretty quickly becomes apparent that skin color does not have any real meaning as far as differences between people. Any real physiological differences. Let me be careful about that, because there are huge cultural differences in the world. And skin color sometimes is connected to that. There is a... But that does not have any... That has nothing to do with anybody's humanity. In Benier's view, the first race had white or sun-tinged olive skin. By contrast, black Africans, the so-called second race, had black skin. That was the result of their sperm and blood. This simple one-liner, stated almost as if in passing, was of critical importance. The simple one-liner, stated almost as if in passing, was of critical importance. Madame de la Sablieri, hostess of his salon, had been an active participant in debates about the role of men's semen and women's eggs and the physical features of their offspring. She therefore would likely have been invested in questions about the role of sperm in physical appearance. More to the point, the statement revealed that Benier's position on the biological bias of physical distinctions among the so-called races. While it is unclear whether he was a proponent of the polygenic argument, he nevertheless believed that white people were innately and physiologically distinct from black people. This fundamental biological divergence was, he suggested, the basis for the observed external physical differences. In his modest treatise, Benier did not come out in favor of African chattel slavery, yet in the context of debates about the appropriateness of enslaving black persons, his assertion that white skin placed one in a biologically distinct first race, while black skin placed a person in a second race, carried a connotation of the social ladder of humanity with whiteness justifiably at the top. Here it is. This is what this is getting to the point that I've been trying to make. Oh, whoa. These ideas were to be read and expanded upon by subsequent scientists and philosophers, several of whom were deeply invested in maintaining or extending the slave trade. If Benier created racial categories for the express purpose of segregating groups of humanity based on their physical appearance. An important part of his project was to detail the particular aesthetic charms, or lack thereof, of women in each race. Okay. Now, I feel like this is sort of... We're not even at the beginning of sort of the gender... the gender distinctions and the problems therein. That goes even further back than this. All the way back, I think. But what we do see here is how it is leaning more on women than men, how it's isolating women more and more. Yeah. Previous scholars have dismissed this aspect of Benier's text as some form of bizarre fluff, evidence of his prurient fascination with women's looks. But Benier was building on a practice of learned men waxing intellectual about women's beauty that had existed since the Renaissance. Moreover, the section on female charm takes up nearly half of Benier's brief manifesto. Under the circumstances, Benier's estimation of women was not off-color, nor was it novel. It simply used new language, that of race, to make judgments about feminine loveliness. Ew. Benier entered the discussion about race-specific female attractiveness with a note about the so-called Hottentot. Hottentot was a derogatory term created by Dutch settlers. In theory, it applied to the Khoikhoi living in the area encompassing Cape of Good Hope and extending to Cape Town into South Africa. Cape Town in South Africa. In practice, however, it was often applied to all Khoisan, meaning people of Khoikhoi, and the Bushmen of South Africa. Blacks of the Cape of Good Hope, Benier wrote, seem to constitute a different type from those of the rest of Africa. They are usually smaller, thinner, with uglier faces. His estimation of Hottentot is notably similar to the common view of Africans in England and Holland during the period as little, low, and foul. Benier was, in fact, attuned to existing stereotypes of the Hottentot, which he exposes by stating some Dutchmen say they speak turkey cock. Whatever that means. What distinguished Benier from the Dutch and English, however, was his assessment that the small, thin, and unappealing Hottentot were an aberration among blacks, a different type, albeit regulated to the same race. The Hottentot, in his view, may have been short, meager, and unattractive, but they said nothing of the appearance of blacks generally. especially black women. On the contrary, Beignet wrote, he had encountered black women who were among the most beautiful in the world. This feels pervy and uncomfortable. It feels fetishistic. His words about black women in general they feel fetishistic. And not in a good whip me, beat me, make me write bad checks kind of way, but like in a much less okay, much more problematic kind of way. I also find it interesting that there's this split between the regular and the Kohoi people. If I'm not reading it, I'm going to try avoiding saying that word. Alright. On the contrary, Beignet wrote he had encountered black women who were among the most beautiful in the world. That I have observed as regards the beauty of women is no less differentiated. Certainly, there are lovely ones, ugly ones, to be found everywhere. I have seen some real beauties in Egypt, which put me in mind of the fair and famed Cleopatra. Among the blacks of Africa, I have also seen some of the very beautiful women who did not have thick lips and snub noses. I have encountered 7 or 8 in various places who were of such astonishing beauty that they put in the shade the Venus of the Palazzo Farnese in Rome, with aquiline nose, small mouth, coral lips, ivory teeth, large bright eyes, gentle features, and a bosom, and everything else of utter perfection. At Mocha I saw several of them completely naked, waiting to be sold, and I can tell you there could be nothing lovelier in the world to see. Ew. Double ew. Gross. Beignet affirms racial differences in beauty by claiming that, like physical features in general, the beauty of women is no less differentiated. Nevertheless, he certifies black women's attractiveness by using the existing standard for white women. Ha ha! Aquiline nose, small mouth, coral lips, ivory teeth, large bright eyes, gentle features. In this way, the black women who were good looking could lay claim to that title only because of their similarity to the neoclassical ideal of Venus. Their attractiveness was contingent upon their closeness to whiteness. Adjacency to whiteness. Again, this right here is to a large degree sort of what we're looking for here. This adjacency to the European beauty ideal, which, as we will see in upcoming chapters, that beauty standard becomes the health standard. Indeed, these women appear to be beating the Venus at her own game. Although Beignet was influenced by the trail of black denigration left by the Dutch and the English, he did not let their perspective of black women contradict what he had seen with his own eyes. His discussion of the attractiveness of some black women was only the starting point of his extended treatment of racially specific enticements. Beignet also included sections on the women he encountered in India, Turkey, and Persia. His work reveals the centrality of concerns about aesthetics, especially women's appearance, in the articulation of the try that again, Trev. In the articulation of the racial theories, that is, to the extent that sperm and blood determine race and appearance, beautiful women could serve as proof of a certain type of inherent racial superiority or inferiority. The long-term impact of Beignet's theories had been debated, but as a progenitor of racial theories, Beignet was often cited by subsequent race theorists. Later race theorists would routinely use race as a justification for the colonial condition, as a way to determine the attractiveness of women around the world, and as a way to in the mid-18th century and early 19th centuries, in the context of the Enlightenment at the peak of the slave trade, the science of race-making took flight. Then, as at its inception, philosophers underscored the purported racial distinctions in facial features, body type, and attractiveness between black women and white women. Beignet's notion of race had touched a nerve. His letter to Madame de Sablière was eventually published in the esteemed Journal des Sçavans, Journal des Sçavans, for the broader scientific community to mull over. Still, the evidence of its impact was not to be witnessed for another 60 years. As it turned out, many French scientists and philosophers at the time of his writing were preoccupied with either towing the intellectual line or fleeing the country in the face of renewed religious persecution. That's where we're going to leave it for today. I feel like there was a lot of stuff in there that was, we got some good points to build upon former points. We really begin to see the use of the attractiveness of women to prop up the race concepts here. It's, yeah, it is what it is. Not really. I mean, it doesn't have to be what it is. It is what it was. We can do better now and make it better now. But so yeah, these we're seeing the we're seeing the sort of the formation of these. We're seeing the continued formation and the cementing of these ideas of the European beauty standard spread throughout Europe with the transatlantic slave trade. We're seeing this connection reinforced here. I think that's where we're at. We're not seeing the connection forming, we're seeing it reinforced. And what we're also seeing is the start of the war on fat. I think we're starting to see the idea beginning to form that European beauty is slim and it has all it, specifically in this book, because it's about fat phobia, it's going to be the European beauty standard, and then health standard is thinness. And the further away from being truly slim, correctly bodied and thin and fine, the closer you are to blackness and then unattractiveness. And that's going to develop into fat phobia in general. And of course that's, that's in the title of the book, Trevor. All of that is inferable from the title of the book. But that's, I think, sort of where we're at and where we're headed. I am gonna leave it here for today. We're gonna go ahead and raid out. Stick around for the raid. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, all you lurkers. Much love. And, yeah. Stick around for the raid. Now is the time on the show when I say, as they say around here, 2 up, 2 down. VA, double deuces. I'm out, y'all.